Welcome to the second week of lectures, and in this week we will look into the socio-political, economic and intellectual history behind the emergence of this discipline, sociology. As we discussed in the previous classes, there are certain requirements or there are certain factors that necessitate the emergence of a new discipline, especially in social sciences. And a social science, emergence of a social science is not the product of a single individual or a single intellectual. It must emerge from a particular context, and this context must convince the existing intellectuals that the prevailing theories or the frameworks are unable to explain or unable to interpret the kind of changes that are happening around them, compelling them to look for better frameworks and better theories and better methodologies which might consolidate over a period of time, thus giving rise to the emergence of a new particular discipline. So, in the case of sociology, this is exactly what happened. As we discussed in the previous class, there is a saying that sociology has a long past but a very short history, because a systematic and critical thinking about the society must have been there in many civilizations, must have been in the pre-modern societies, but the emergence of this kind of thinking in a more institutionalized, in a more systematic manner emerged only in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. And so the emergence of this particular discipline as an institutional one, through the institutions of higher learning, through the writings of important scholars and thinkers, took place in the 18th and 19th century Europe, especially the Western Europe, and that requires quite a lot of examination. And the sociology that emerged during this particular time, it spread across the globe mainly through the process of colonialism. So, in this class we will look at what are these factors, what are these specific contexts that generated this particular new discipline in Europe. And these are the following resource materials that we will be using for this lecture. Edward Roy's book titled Classical Social Theory and Modern Society, and then Ken Morrison's work Marx, Durkheim and Weber, Formations of Modern Social Thought, and Kenneth Tucker's book titled Classical Social Theory, A Contemporary Approach. And we also hope to have a couple of conversations with experts in the field of history of science and technology and also in philosophy. Now, sociology emerged as a new discipline in response to the great transformation which swept across the Europe in the 18th and 19th century, resulting in the demise of the pre-modern world and the rise of the modern world. So, this is a very important paragraph. It talks about a kind of a great transformation, and what does this great transformation means? Great transformation which swept across Europe in the 18th and 19th century, resulting in the demise of the pre-modern world and the rise of the modern world. So, we specifically situate the emergence of sociology with the emergence of the modern world. So, this modern world quite often indicates the emergence of a modern vis-a-vis that of a pre-modern or a traditional society. So, we will see that in the coming lectures, almost all social scientists whom we are going to engage with were all preoccupied with the questions of what constitutes this modern and how do society function itself in this modern field, in what way are they different from the traditional societies. So, a new modern emerged in Europe during this particular time, and the old medieval or pre-modern social system or social order began crumbling down, and that happened as a result of what is known as this great transformation, a complete, a comprehensive, a thorough transformation that left nothing unchanged in the socio-political and historical context of Europe. So, without understanding these transformations, we will not be able to understand why and how a new discipline like sociology emerged. What were the historical factors that necessitated the emergence of sociology? So, that is the question. What were the socio-historical and cultural requirements or imperatives that necessitated the emergence of sociology. So, this term great transformation is a very, very important concept, because it is a very overarching, it is a very comprehensive term. It indicates the kind of a transformation that happened almost in absolute sense. So, there were basically three revolutions or triple revolutions that took place in Europe during this particular time. One is widely known as the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, which indicates the kind of intellectual and cultural revolution. So, we are talking at the kind of very important transformations that happened in the realm of ideas, in the realm of knowledge, in the realm of reasoning, in the realm of cultural ideas and then intellectual engagements. Second is a series of incidents, most importantly the French Revolution of 1789, which indicates the kind of radical changes happened in the field of politics and society. We will take up each one of these developments in detail in the coming lectures, but these are important factors to keep in mind. And then thirdly, the large transformation, a complete transformation with respect to the rise of capitalism and the subsequent process of industrialization, which again replaced an agrarian feudal system that was reigning in the medieval period in Europe. And all these changes happened in the background of Renaissance and Reformation. And Reformation, you must be knowing, was a very important movement that happened in Roman Catholic Church. It emerged as a protest against the perceived corruption and then decadence of Roman Catholic Church, and then that led to the emergence of Protestantism with a very powerful theological and organizational challenge to Roman Catholic Church. And Renaissance was a very powerful movement that happened across the cultural, political and social and philosophical realm, which brought in a new sense of arguments based on ideas of humanism and other things. So, this great transformation, a combination of all these 4 or 5 factors or 3 major factors, the cultural, the intellectual and the economic factors, they brought in large scale transformation, unprecedented kind of transformation. I will just read this paragraph. They gave rise to new worldviews and aspirations, new attitudes and orientations, new political and economic institutions, and new forms of social organization and patterns of living. They set into motion new social forces, new development dynamics and new social movements, and they brought new problems and new possibilities onto the historical stage. So, this particular paragraph talks about the magnitude and the depth of changes that confronted Europe during this particular time. If you go through each of these sentences, each of these words, you will realize the kind of the magnitude of the kind of changes that swept across Europe during this particular time. It brings in new worldviews, it brings in new aspirations, especially aspiration regarding the political aspiration of ordinary people, and it brings in new attitudes and orientations which were completely different from the traditional religiocentric kind of an argument, and new political and economic institutions. Capitalism is emerging, nation state is emerging, democracy is emerging, and new forms of social organizations and patterns of living. We will discuss what were the kind of social transformations or changes happened when people migrated in large scale from rural areas to urban areas and then began to live in urban places. So, what does an urban living mean, and how is it different from the way people live in rural societies, and what are the differences in the kind of social relationships that people develop? They set into motion a new social forces. The kind of, maybe the most important example could be the working class movement. The people, the laborers, the people who work in factories, they began to organize themselves, and that completely transformed the kind of social realities in several places. And new developmental dynamics, the new social movements, and they brought new problems and new possibilities onto the historical stage. So this great transformation, or these 2-3 centuries of historical period in Europe, is seen as a specific turn in the history of Europe, and also that of mankind, because what you understand in general terms as the modernity emerged during this particular time. And in the next paragraph, it's a list of words which emerged and became very, very prominent during this particular time. And these words include industry, factory, working class, middle class, capitalism, socialism, communism, liberal, conservative, scientist, engineer, utilitarian, journalism, economic crisis, pauperism, strike, ideology, intellectual, humanitarian, statistics, bureaucracy, commercialism, masses, unemployment, and sociology. And you can easily understand that each of these terms have become so common in our everyday language. We can't imagine to have a conversation or have a discussion about the contemporary society without invoking any of these particular terms, because they are so important, they are so ingrained in the contemporary discussions about our society. They are so important terms when we talk about the modern society, about the contemporary society. They exist not only as terms, but they exist as extremely important institutions, extremely important ideas, extremely important processes, as well as social forms of organization. And there is this final word, sociology, is also one of the terms that emerged during this particular time and remain as a very, very important term when we talk about the contemporary situation. Now, what do we mean by all these transformations? What are the consequences of all these transformations, and why these consequences are so relevant when you talk about the emergence of sociology? So the argument is that the emergence of the social as a distinct realm of inquiry that requires specific epistemological and methodological orientation. So one of the important takeaways from all these discussions that we need to keep it in mind, or one of the most important consequences of all these transformations, is the emergence of the social. The social emerges as a distinct realm of inquiry. It is no longer seen as a side effect of certain political or economic or psychological or historical aspect. Rather, the social emerges as a distinct field which requires specific epistemological and methodological orientation. It can no longer be seen as a side effect, or it can no longer be seen as an epiphenomenon of any other human activity. The social deserves to be studied exclusively. The social deserves to be studied with theoretical rigor and methodological orientation. So this is the kind of a development that led to the emergence of a new discipline called sociology and its subsequent development. So one of the most important concerns of all these initial theories or the early theorists who began developing sociology was the whole question of social order. We will come back to this term again and again because it is one of the most central themes of sociology, especially classical social theories. What do you mean by social order? Social order also is explained by other terms like social equilibrium or social stability. So it basically tries to understand how a society is able to maintain itself, how a society is able to maintain its order, how a society is able to stay together and then function efficiently. So this whole question of social order and stability was seen as in disarray, and the discipline emerged as an attempt to make sense of these changes and, if possible, restore order and stability. So we have discussed the kind of transformation, at least in brief. We will discuss them more in detail in the subsequent classes. So we see a kind of a complete transformation, a comprehensive transformation, a thorough transformation that the European societies had not witnessed so far. And that completely threw this notion of social order or social stability into disarray. And the society was seen by many as a kind of a chaotic one. without any order, without any control, and nobody knew where it is leading to. Nobody knew what kind of consequences this might create. So many of these early thinkers were really worried about this lack of stability or lack of social order, and they wanted this discipline of sociology to emerge as a distinct discipline which is capable of understanding these changes scientifically and, if possible, to restore order and stability. So it's very important to keep it in mind that, at least among some of the theorists, sociology was a very conservative discipline. It was a discipline which did not really approve of or encourage the kind of rapid social changes. It was very skeptical about many of these changes, and many of them were conservatives. They wanted to bring back social order. They wanted to at least to slow down the kind of changes, and they wanted to bring back the equilibrium or social order. This is a major debate. We will come back to that later. And also is followed by the emergence of sociology as a discipline, as a science of the society. And this is again very, very important terms, the science of the society. Why should sociology be seen as the science of society? What is something so special about science? When we talk about socius and logos, so logos means science. So why was that sociology imagined as a science? And this again has a long history. It again has a very important context in the development of human knowledge. We will talk about it. And sociology also claimed that to study society objectively so as to understand its transformations better. Again, this term is very, very important. Studying something objectively. Okay? You try to study something objectively without allowing your own biases and ideological inclinations to influence that. There is a distinction between objectivity and subjectivity. So you talk about your subjective opinion, that different people will have different opinion. When you read a poem or when you watch a movie, if you go as a group of people, different people will have different opinion about that, because the way you like a movie, the other person may not like it. So because it's individual centric, it's subjective. But science does not speak in the language of subjectivity. It speaks the language of objectivity. The length of this pen or the weight of this pen remains constant irrespective of the person who measures it. So science is predominantly, or science is completely centering around the idea of objective facts, things that can be ascertained without being influenced by the person who assesses that. So sociology emerged with this claim that the sociologists will be able to understand and explain society without allowing his or her personal subjective dispositions to influence the kind of subject that he studies. And this again is a very controversial claim. This whole claim that somebody can study society objectively, okay, as if to tell the truth, what exactly that is. Sociology emerged with this claim, but later this claim was thoroughly questioned, and I don't think that any sensible sociologist at present would claim that they are studying things in a very complete, absolutely objective manner. Because what is objective, what is subjective, and how important this objectivity, they are all subjected to a series of very fascinating theoretical discussions and deliberations. So it's a more complicated field. But when sociology emerged, it wanted to qualify itself as a science. It wanted to claim itself to be a discipline, a science which studies society in a completely objective manner. So how was this argument about science and objectivity realized? What were the kind of arguments that came along with this idea that sociology is a science and sociology is also studies things objectively? And there are two terms or two epistemological positions about studying a particular subject. One is the emergence of empiricism, and the second one is the emergence of positivism. These two turns in the development of human knowledge, especially regarding epistemology, plays a very important role in the emergence of sociology and its later subsequent transformations. So, empiricism is a philosophical strand that argues that knowledge of the material world must be based on straightforward observation and sensus perception. And this, when you talk about this in the contemporary society or in the contemporary times, it look very straightforward, it look very simple, because we try to understand society through our senses. So, anything that we are able to observe, anything that we are able to measure, anything that we are able to see through our senses must inform the basis of our understanding of that particular object. But when this particular argument came up, it came up against a very powerful theoretical traditions based on theology, based on metaphysics, and a host of other kind of similar kind of arguments, where you create ideas about the world, you create ideas about yourself, you create ideas about almost everything without any way of ascertaining them through empirical observations. For example, theology. How do you go by the theological arguments? How do you prove whether a particular theological argument is right or wrong? How do you experience or how do you observe a theological argument? You know that theology has answers for every question. Theology has, any theology is a comprehensive set of explanations for everything. It answers every human question. But the moment you try to ask the question, how do you come to this kind of conclusions? It has a different set of explanations, it has a different set of arguments, and these arguments are not based on observation, or these arguments are not based on empiricism. They are based on other forms of arguments. Similarly, the emergence of positivism. In the coming lectures, we will talk about the emergence of science, we will talk about the emergence of science and technology, industrial revolution, and about enlightenment. So, science emerges as a very important paradigm during this particular time. Science emerges as a very powerful paradigm which can offer you more convincing explanations about the world around you by displacing the religious explanation, by almost nullifying the religious explanation. So, this was the context in which sociology emerged, and one of the most important foundations of sociology was the argument that sociology is a positive science, especially by the so-called father of sociology, Auguste Comte. He argued that sociology is a science. We will discuss that in detail. But positivism is the view that social phenomena such as human social behavior and how societies are structured ought to be studied using only the methods of natural sciences. So, positivism is a view about the appropriate methodology of social science, emphasizing empirical observation. So, the argument is that if natural sciences are able to understand the nature better in a convincing manner, if physics and chemistry and biology and other disciplines are able to unravel the mystery of the universe, unravel the mystery of the nature, what prevents us from using the similar scientific methods to understand our society? So, sociology was fashioned, or sociology was imagined as a science of society which uses scientific method to understand the society. So, you do not need to really depend upon any of the religious text, you do not need to depend upon any of the philosophical text, rather you depend upon scientific methods to understand how the society is structured, how the society is brought together, how the society functions. That provides you with a more clearer, more convincing and unbiased objective picture about the society in which we live. So, these two terms are important, the terms of the concept of empiricism and the concept of positivism, because they laid foundation for the methodological orientation of the discipline, which was later criticized. There were divergent standpoints of methodology emerged. There was a development of an anti-positivism later with Max Weber. We will discuss all these points later. So, let us conclude this session, and in the coming sessions we will take up many of these specific points or specific factors that led to the emergence of sociology. So, I have listed out several factors, and we will take up each one of them specifically in the coming classes. Thank you.